Good afternoon. Thank you for coming and thank you for visiting the online. My name is Na-young Kim from Seoul National University Bundang Hospital, gastroenterologist, and the co-chair is Professor Lee Hang-eun from Ewha Women's University Hospital, neurologist. As you know, we had a good time at 2023 BrainLink X-Lab Day entitled Exploring Life Phenomena, Integrating Clinical Science and Artificial Intelligence for Inclusive Research at Kensington Hotel, very good hotel, located at Gangwon-do, Pyeongchang. The workshop consisted of 3 parts. First one was from neurons to system neuroscience, exploring the future brain science on sex and gender-specific research. Second one was highly reliable data in clinical science. The last one was inclusive medical and pharmacological research. Total 38 professors and graduate students and postdocs attend this workshop, and all of us exposed to various fields from basic science and clinical science up to artificial intelligence. Luckily, everyone received tremendous stimuli from our research and were connected each other with a strong tie to whom we can consult when we meet obstacle in our research. Especially worldwide famous experts attended this workshop from USA, UK, and Germany, as well as Netherlands. And I really appreciate their excellent presentation with kind and warm manners. And I also learned a lot. Here, 4 abroad scholars participated in this talk concert, and they will provide us their experience and their some knowledge. First of all, I would like to introduce 4 scholars: Professor Sabin from Radboud University, Germany, and Bielefeld University, Netherlands, and Professor Park Sung-gyun from Michigan University, and Robert Todd Constable from Yale University, and Professor Kong Fat Wong Lin from Ulster University, London. Thank you for coming. I think they must be very tired because they arrived in Seoul just 4 days ago, and most of them will leave tomorrow. And luckily, they were very healthy, I found. Each excellent professor will summarize their presentation for 5 minutes. And after all 4 presentations, there will be active panel discussion. And then there is a Q&A from the audience, including online. So if the participants want to give a question in the online, please send a message in advance through chatting chang that I have a question. Then they will let you speak loudly. Thank you very much. And then first, I would like to introduce Professor Sabin. She's very active and very vigorous, I found. Whose major is sex gender specific medicine and public health. Please welcome Sabin.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the detailed introduction. I have marvelous recovery abilities, as you can see. I was told I have 5 minutes, so I have a pitch, which means I have 3 slides. And I'm only going to give a very, very short summary of what I told you in detail. And whoever is interested, I'm happy to share the slides that I used for the longer talk, if you want to go more in depth of what I talked. Now, this is really just an introduction that I'm giving, and this slide I showed with the main intent of making sure that everybody who's doing this kind of research uses the appropriate terminology, because this terminology is relevant for us to produce reproducible and robust data. So what we do when we work on biological factors is we are in this area here, where we talk about sex differences. And when we investigate sex, the way we can do this is by looking at genetics, the X chromosome or the Y chromosome. We can look at hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, and in how far they fluctuate and which influence they can have. And in most cases, sex in the animals and the individuals that participate in our studies is defined at birth by anatomy. So when we investigate any of these things, and these are the reference values we use, we're actually talking about sex and not about gender. We can, however, also investigate gender because gender also has a relevant impact on especially access to healthcare, on communication in healthcare, on the way we live with the diseases we have, and on quality of life in general. To investigate gender, what we do in biomedical research is really operationalize it at different levels. So we talk about gender dimensions, and you can see some of these here, starting with gender identity, which is, am I a woman, a man, a non-binary person? The second one is gender norms and gender roles, which is what society expects us to be, in a way, what is femininity and masculinity, and what happens if we conform or not conform with these ideas, and how far does that impact, for example, our access to healthcare or our healthcare experience. And then we have gender relations, which is the interaction, if you want, between the two. So what happens if I, myself, with my gender identity, am confronted with the gender norms and gender roles of society, in how far will that impact my access to healthcare and the communication within the healthcare experience. So if you do any kind of research in this field, and I hope you will, I urge you to use the correct terminology because this will help us also later on, if you report it, to reproduce these experiments exactly and to increase the data and the robustness of the data that we have. However, what I just showed you is somewhat of an artificial distinction because if we look at the reality of our patients and of all of us, we actually live in a complex world and not in a vacuum. So what happens is that a baby born with the sex attributes that I just defined will grow up in a system, in its family and its community, institutions, and in a legal system, which are all defined by gender. So that means that there's a constant interaction between sex and gender. It is somewhat difficult at times to take these two apart. So that's why it's even more important to look in our research to be precise at what it is that we're investigating and what we're not looking for. What happens with this interaction between sex and gender is that together with other factors, be it ability, age, class, and race, which are depicted here, we establish, whether we do this consciously or unconsciously, a certain gradient within our societies, which impacts healthcare overall. It impacts in how far people have access to healthcare. It impacts which kind of diagnosis they have access to, which kind of healthcare they will be provided with. A lot of times it even impacts if they're going to the doctor at all. So in a way, this system at a social level impacts the overall healthcare experience. And then, of course, this is not just at the societal level, but at the individual level as well. So that's just to say that, of course, for research purposes, we try to separate the two, but in the reality, they interact with each other. I gave a lot of examples what could possibly go wrong, but given the 5 minutes, I can't give them now. So I will just give you a number of things that I think are important for your research if you want to look into sex and gender. So first of all, it is important to have information about your samples. And what I mean is if you work with cells, a lot of times I ask investigators in the room, do you know the sex of your cells? And I'd say about 50% usually do. So the first question is really, what kind of samples are you working with? Do you know if they are, and if the karyotype is stable, for example? If you do work with humans or animals, well, include at least both sexes. And if you want to investigate gender, think about what it is that you will be investigating. So as I said before, gender identity, gender roles, gender norms, it's not all the same. Not all will be maybe what you want to investigate or will be needed, so be clear about what it is that you're looking for. This number 3 is an important one. It's not as easy as it seems, so I would urge to consult experts in the fields. By now, there are quite a few experts in all kinds of different fields of medicine, so find somebody in your field who maybe can advise you and help you with this. Number 4 is disaggregate your data. We still have a lot of publications where data is not reported in a disaggregated manner, not in the main publication, but also not in the supplementary materials. So this is really important, especially when it comes to pharmacological research that I talked about today. It would be ideal if you stratified your analysis, and as easy as this seems, but unfortunately is not happening as we would like to, report the disaggregated format of analysis. So sometimes it's done and nothing is found, and then it's not reported. Nevertheless, if I want to do a meta-analysis, I would still like to have access to this kind of data, even if you didn't find a difference. So please report these kind of results. And what we're trying to do here today, and what I hope that you will also take home from this today, is please spread the word about this, about the relevance of this kind of work, and the fact that it could make all of our investigations somewhat more informative and hopefully better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very clear and concise presentation. The next speaker is Professor Park Sung-kyun, whose major is environmental epidemiology. Please welcome him.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here and have a chance to talk about and then share my experience in working in this cohort study. Looks like the Sabine was very wise to squeeze and then just use the 3 slides, and looks like I have too many slides for 5 minutes. So let me move fast. So the main goal of this 5-minute time that I want to deliver is to introduce this women's cohort. So the name is Study of Women's Health Across the Nation, in short, SWAN. So this study was designed to characterize what is the hormonal change during the menopausal transition and the risk factor that can impact the subsequent health outcome. This study was established in 1996 and 1997, and then since then we had an annual the follow-up visit, and then consistently we continue this study until now. And then just before I come visit to Korea here, we just completed our 18th follow-up visit. So this is a multi-site and multiracial ethnic cohort, and as you can see, there are 7 study sites, including white women, black, Japanese and Chinese and Hispanic. And this slide highlights how long this study has been done, and then consistently collect the information from the participant. And as you can see, at the beginning we had an annual follow-up visit when we collect their clinical behavioral factor and then how their hormone change over time. And then this information allow us to evaluate how this change during the menopausal transition impact their later life health outcome. And then actually I didn't join this study when this study began. And then I was able to join this study in 2013 when I introduced, I am very interested in this environmental health study, and can I use your biospecimen to measure environmental chemical exposure? And they were very open to give this opportunity to me, and then I was able to assess this chemical, and then I designed this SWAN multi-pollutant study. And then this is a very busy slide, but what kind of environmental chemical I measure. And then these are the list of the chemical. But I want to give you just one set of the chemical, which is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. In Korean, this is 과불화합물, 화합물. And then PFAS is very, this is a very hot topic in US and globally. And this is because these chemicals are very widely used. And then, as you can see, the chemical structure here, because all the hydrogen in the carbon structure are replaced with fluorine, that's why this chemical is very strong, and it's almost impossible to break down. So that's why these chemicals are known as forever chemicals. And then this chemical also known as everywhere chemical, because as you can see here, so even today, you may already use this type of product. And because of this widespread, we are exposed to this chemical every day. And then the one study that I want to show you today is our study looking at this PFAS and the time to menopause. And then we found that the women who have high exposure reach the menopause about 2 years earlier than the women with low exposure level. And another study we look at is to look at the type 2 diabetes, and we found that the women in the top, the 1/3, more likely to develop diabetes about 2.6 times higher than the women with a low exposure level. And our big achievement is, so this study is not the single study that contribute to this regulatory guideline change, but we are very proud of contributing this change, which means that EPA, after not only our study but also other study, EPA lowered this standard guideline from 70 ppt to almost nothing, 0. So they don't allow this chemical detected in drinking water, which is a huge achievement, and then all the population can benefit from this change. Let me skip this. So the final take-home message is that it is very important to establish and then continue this type of well-designed long-term longitudinal cohort study, and life course approach, biobank, and then outreach, communication, engagement, and without engagement with the participant, this data and then this the outcome cannot be achieved. And then establish women cohort to tackle issue concerning women's health. And finally, it is very important to promote the translation, and then eventually we need to develop this evidence-based intervention and then policy change. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Park, for your interesting presentation. So I'm Hyang-Hoon Lee from Ewha Women's University, co-moderator of this talk concert. And let me introduce the third speaker, Professor Robert Constable from Yale University. He received his PhD in medical and biophysics from University of Toronto and currently a professor of Department of Diagnostic Radiology and Biomedical Engineering at Yale University, and at the same time co-director of MI Research Center of Yale University. He recently got an honor to be an endowed professor named Elizabeth Mears and House Jameson Professor. Please welcome him.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. My work is really focused on understanding the brain and the brain systems that support behavior. And in doing that, we use fMRI, functional imaging, and we relate the brain systems to behavior. So since the earliest studies in psychology started off with behavior, trying to monitor external behaviors, and from there they developed cognitive psychology, which is to try to break behavior into components of cognition, with the assumption that these internal mental functions could be studied using experiments. And then in the 80s and 90s, neuroimaging came along, and neuroimaging provided the capability to look at brain function, not only function or structure and function. And in particular, functional MRI in the 90s was developed to look at actual functional units in the brain. And so neuroimaging can now link these different scales from brain imaging to the cognitive psychology and the cognitive constructs and relate that to behavior. And so that's what I'm very interested in, and we use kind of machine learning and artificial intelligence methods to develop models that link these systems. So in doing this, we can identify the networks supporting test performance on sort of standardized tests. So we learn about how the brain works. And we can also do this in reverse. We can use the brain activity to say something about what the tests are actually measuring, so we can test the tests. And so that's very interesting and provides good insights into how our brains work. And what we've discovered over the years is that we need separate models for each sex. Men and women are wired differently, and we see evidence of that when we look at brain function. And we also have clinical applications of this work, which is to understand when the brain doesn't work, so various neurologic disorders, and see how their circuits are altered. So to do this, we build models. We break the brain up into what are called nodes here. And we can look at the relationship between different nodes, and we get what's called the human connectome, which is this matrix shown on the right. And the human connectome has information in it about individual traits. So we can predict a subject's traits, like their attention capabilities, their memory capabilities, and things like that, through models that relate this matrix to behavior. And so doing that, taking some cognitive test scores, we can find the relationship between brain organization and performance on these tests. And so there's a number of steps that we go through, which I won't go through all these different steps, but basically we find the systems that support the behavior, and we build predictive models so that we can bring in new individuals and test these models, thereby validate them. So we get a relationship between the functional connectivity in the brain, which we'll call network score, and some performance on a test, a cognitive test. And once we have that relationship, we can then bring in new individuals and test each new individual and compare how we do with their predictive score versus the observed score. And that tells us how good our model is. And that's really, so here's the model stage, and this is really the validation stage. And in doing this, we want to establish kind of regular boundaries for these sorts of relationships. And that once we do that, we can see how these vary between, say, men and women as a function of sex and or gender issues. And so it's very important to look at sex here. We know from years of research that cognitive testing, so many of the tests have biases in them, so they're not really suitable for each sex, or there are different score ranges for each sex because of various social and cultural issues. And we published a paper last year that showed that if the bias is not taken into consideration, these models fail for those individuals. I've been interested in studies of sex differences in the functional organization of the brain for many years. One of the first papers I was involved with on this was back in 1995, and we've, over the years, published a number of papers looking at sex differences. And they can be profound in many cases, and so it's very important to take this into consideration when you build models like this. So our work is really has shown that there are intrinsic connectivity differences between males and females, and there's a sex by age interaction, so you also have to take into age in these models. And there are kind of main effects of sex tend to be in the medial temporal regions and a little bit into the frontal parietal as well. So these differences are significant enough that we can actually identify the sex of the individual through looking at their brain studies. So we can do predictive modeling and categorize patients or subjects. And knowing this, we have to think about then what the implications of this are for using fixed canonical networks and brain atlases. And we would argue that you need to take into account sex differences when developing these atlases. So to summarize, we can build these brain behavior models that identify the circuits in the brain that support behavior on our test performance on a number of different tests. And in doing so, we can learn both about the tests and we can learn about the systems that support performance on those tests. So there's circuit identification in this work. There are the component contributions. I didn't really go over this, but we can break these circuits into specific cognitive constructs and say something about the contribution of each of those constructs. We can test then what systems the cognitive tests are relying upon and to what extent. And then we can also look for outliers and say something about the people for whom the tests fail. And in doing that, we realized that we need separate models for men and women, and it's important to take these differences into consideration. And so we can complete the loop here. We can go from the early behavior studies from the 1800s all the way through cognitive psychology today, and link some of the findings from those early studies to brain imaging results, and understand the brain behavior relationships that we're interested in. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd, for your interesting introduction about brain imaging and behavioral prediction model. The next speaker is Professor Kangfat Wong-Ling from Worcester University. He received his bachelor's and master's degree in physics from National University of Singapore, and he received his PhD in computational neuroscience from Brandeis University, and now he's a full professor of School of Computing Engineering and Intelligent System of Worcester University. Please join me in welcoming Professor Kangfat Wong-Ling.
Thank you for the introduction. So I'm going to talk about practical AI for dementia diagnosis and prognosis. With a focus on embracing inclusivity. So dementia is an umbrella term for a variety of neurodegenerative diseases, and that causes decline in cognitive abilities, especially memory, and it inflicts a global social economic burden globally. So, the World Health Organization has stated that there's an increasing trend of people going to be diagnosed with dementia, and there's still a big mystery on the risk factors for dementia. So here I'm going to talk about more specifically the challenges in dementia diagnosis and prognosis. So specifically, there's a lack of standardization, consistency, objectivity, and efficiency in dementia clinical assessment, as shown in this, oops, I don't know. So, as shown in the some of the points over there, which I will skip. And then there's also a lack of reliable and robust biomarkers or markers for detection or prediction. And finally, there's a lack of inclusivity for not only for gender, but also for availability for healthcare and assessments for diagnosis, for example. So how can AI, specifically machine learning, can support dementia diagnosis or prognosis? So what they can do primarily is to create automated decision-making, for example, through classification of discrete states or regression of continuous states, and to aid clinical decision-making. So machine learning models can have the promises of making more accurate, objective, standardized, economical, and efficient decisions. And it has the tools to handle high-dimensional complex data and to provide further insights. However, despite the promising work of AI or ML, machine learning, most are still not readily adopted by clinicians because it's still quite academic. And then there's the lots of different complex data to be handled, which is not easy. And then there's class labels. That means when you're training the machine learning models, you don't know what to really train for. Is it just a clinician diagnosis? And the data is quite dirty. For example, there'll be missingness. Most of the cognitive and functional assessments used by clinicians and academic researchers are not optimized. They are decades old. And so on. There's also differences due to dementia subtypes that need to be dealt with, and including gender differences. And finally, there's the humans in the loop AI that is missing in many of the algorithms and apps, which I will talk about very briefly in a moment. So some of these challenges and problems, issues, has been discussed in my paper with some of my colleagues, including doctors, medical doctors, in this paper here. In this paper especially, we offer an approach, an integrated approach, wherein we have all the different computational and mathematical approaches to allow us to make better clinical decision support systems. For example, we can make use of, we can build AI algorithms and then translate to app. And over here, this is one of our apps that is being validated on UK patient data. And here we make use of regression to predict dementia severity of a single individual patient along a continuous spectrum. So this is to aid clinical decision making for doctors. And also the assessments here are being selected by the algorithms. So there's a much lesser number of features or assessments that's needed. So making the assessment really efficient. And also because it is an app, so it becomes more inclusive than a typical healthcare or dementia care pathway. Here's another app that we have developed. So it includes not only the accuracy of detecting dementia severity, but it also includes optimizing it for the assessment time of each assessment or questionnaire, and also the cost, the budget, how much it costs an assessment. So everything can be optimized in this algorithm because it's very mathematical. And importantly, this app includes a stakeholder who can select the specific the assessments and key in, input the assessment time in there. And they just need to click a button to run the algorithm. So that allows, so there's the video, but I'm going to skip that. And AI or machine learning can also help to reduce the complexity of data like this here. We reduce it to a low-dimensional space where we can look at the clusters. And it turns out that here the clusters can be clustered into male and female. So there might be some differences between them, which is actually the case. And also we can make predictions based on some of the clusters or cases in the clusters. And this kind of clusters can also be studied in further depth by, for example, using feature selection in machine learning. So in this case, we found that genetic gender and whether your mother has Alzheimer's disease is very important in identifying which cluster is, which data belongs to which cluster. And then over here, we challenge the notion that clinician diagnosis is the gold standard. So we make use of purely data-driven method to relabel what do you mean by having Alzheimer's disease, for example. And in another study, we use interpretable machine learning to distinguish dementia subtypes with or without brain imaging data, because some of the medical centers might not have those facilities. So that allows inclusivity. Other studies have made use of brain imaging and further distinguish, for example, Alzheimer's disease into 4 different subtypes. And turns out that these subtypes is linked to age of onset, age of assessment, and sex distribution, among others. And I think this is the final results that I want to mention, is that different diagnostic measures can influence the risk of protection attributed to drug classes, and that include gender differences. And I've mentioned some of the solutions here that helps to partially provide offer to the challenges that I've mentioned earlier on. I just want to finish with this outlook and further challenges. So based on those things that I've discussed, it seems that there's a need for a consensus on dementia diagnostic measure and further gender-specific studies. And secondly, we need to have clinical validation of the apps that the machine learning people are developing, and including biases in their algorithms. Dementia subtypes, so there's a need to identify dementia subtypes, comorbidities, biomechanisms, stratified treatment and care. We also need to identify risk factors for prevention, intervention, especially given the immunotherapy drugs are being developed for dementia, Alzheimer's disease especially, healthy aging, and so on. And we need to develop data acquisition, integration, and platform in in a less biased way. And finally, we need to all together put them together to redesign the outdated dementia care pathway that is currently facing the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wang Ning, for your challenging presentation. Now we are going to have a short break for 5 minutes. We need some time to set up for panel discussion, so please don't go away and stay tuned for panel discussion. We'll meet you in 5 minutes.
Yeah, right now it is panel discussion time. So time is limited. I would like to ask first question to Sabine, Professor Sabine. I know you are working very hard regarding the sex and gender specific medicine in Germany and the Netherlands. In the school, how the students respond to your lectures? And second question is, I guess there should be some improvement, much. But how do you measure the improvement?
Okay, so first of all, the students, especially in the last few years, are the ones that are mostly asking about this. So in a lot of medical faculties, especially in Germany, but also in the Netherlands, sex and gender sensitive medicine is not taught systematically yet, not in the mandatory teaching. And the students in some of these universities where it is not taught are actually the ones that are organizing lectures by themselves online to get the information. So I would say that the students are really driving this in the last 5 to 10 years. And of course, we're very happy to see this interest in the younger generation. So that's really nice. For the second question, I'll try to keep it short so that we have enough time for everybody. When it comes to measuring it, so for us, when in Bielefeld where I work, and also in Radboud and at Charité where I worked before, these are some of the universities that actually implement it in the mandatory teaching. So you have to do it. And you have the opportunity to ask students. So it's part of the testing that they will have at the end of their modules. So you actually see what they have learned. And I think this is probably the most efficient way to see that in some form of testing. And the other thing is also, if it is not tested, students, especially in medical school, tend to not study the subject because there's so many things they're learning about. They have to rationally decide where to invest their time when they study. So the fact that it is not in the tests might also be discouraging. So I think that's the most relevant one, is really to try to bring it in there. Even though if you do like lectures, external lectures, or you do seminars, you can also do some testing at the end, just some questionnaires, and see how the knowledge increases.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the Korean medical students are just a machine of test. So they can respond very well about the testing. So maybe I had better tell my dean about your just skills. So the next question is to Professor Park Sung-kyun. You are very proud of that the USA some regulation of pollutant for your work. And if you are in Korea, how would you just tell or some to reduce the ppm to 0 to Korean government?
Well, so even in US, to lower that PFAS from 70 ppt to 0 took, I guess, more than several decades. So the 70 ppt was not the level that started at the beginning. Even the standard level was higher. And after we recognized the issue of this PFAS, and then the first step was the lawsuit in the Parkersburg in West Virginia area near the DuPont facility, and then they won that lawsuit, and then so that was the first step. The community people, they recognized this problem, and then through the legal system, and then they were the champion, and then because of their sacrifice, and then other people who could be also influenced by this the toxic chemical benefit from that their sacrifice. And so it's not just a one person or one group and then scientific evidence can push the government to change their regulation, but the more like the community, their engagement, and then scientists and then community, the resident work together to push the government, and then so my understanding is that even they lobby the politician a lot to make this happen, and then eventually we ended up getting this the lower level. So this is not just a simple step, but it takes a very long time. And for Korean government, usually my understanding is that once U.S. changed the regulatory guideline, and then Korea follow. But the PFAS issue, the Korea may have a even more serious problem. If that is true, then the Korea should proactively, react this problem and set up even stronger and stricter regulation, and then other country can follow, and so everyone can benefit from that change.
Thank you very much. Your team is very excellent, I think.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question to Professor Tak Constable. So you mentioned about the brain behavioral prediction model can be challenging in so it doesn't fit for all in the same way. Do you think we can have some sort of strategy to overcome this problem, or do you think we can still have a pre-tuned model, for example, for each sex or developmental age, something like that?
Yeah, so I think we can do both things. So there are general factors that span age and sex and education and many other things, and so we can use these models to identify those factors, those common factors. But at the same time, as we grow these data sets and get better algorithms for AI and linking the different factors, we can start to investigate in more detail specific characteristics of different populations and how differences in education, social norms, things like that, how those influence brain function and performance on behavioral tests. And so I think as we grow these data sets and learn more about the details, we can explore in more detail the specific components of the brain that support different functions.
Okay, thank you. I have a question to Professor Kongfat Wonglin this time. So you showed us many challenges and some strategies to overcome these challenges, like some sort of clinical platform or app kind of things, so that you can save the MRI scanning, something like that, right? So do you think we can use that in real clinical world? Like we can actually, the patient pay for the app or platform, and then the clinicians can use those kind of diagnostic system?
Thank you. And so in terms of the app, we are already working with a startup company that work with that mediate between us and the clinicians in our region. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is to reduce the waiting time and to allow more accessibility to assess whether you have dementia, or if so, what is the severity level. And so they don't have to really go to the medical center. So they just have an app to check, like a screening tool, even before you reach the medical center. So that reduces the waiting time and kind of help to redesign, at least partially, the dementia care pathway. And so on. So there are many levels to it. You can, and the company is offering, like, for example, if you want to do brain imaging, maybe pay a little bit more, and then, but it offers a higher probability of higher accuracy of detecting dementia and so on. So that is Yeah, so that is one of the approach.
So I have another question that in England it is, I heard it is difficult to approach to medical care, but Korea is different. So, but anyway, what do you expect? Your some app or other some the machine AI can be available in England in I think more 5 years later or very recently 1 year later or something like that.
Yeah, that's a bit. We will see. I mean, we'll work hard. We are moving from test validating from one medical center to another, and once we are confident, we can keep growing. But But it's challenging. It's very challenging.
I could add a comment to that, and that is, England has, and I think Korea too, they have national health services, which is actually a big advantage to not only to healthcare, but to developing models that use AI and mine the data. In a place like the US where healthcare is very fractured and there's no national healthcare system, it's actually really hard to generate significant data sets that are consistent and don't differ on every dimension. So the UK right now has this UK Biobank data set where they're following something like 52,000 subjects over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's going to be tremendous data for mining and building models to develop systems that can streamline diagnosis and really zero in on the factors that are critical. And Korea, I think, because they have a national healthcare system, will have an advantage there as well.
Thank you very much. So, is there any question from the audience here on online? So maybe there is some question online. Actually, the Korean University professor of public health, Professor Choi Seung-ah, has some question to Professor Park Sung-kyun. Yeah. So she is waiting there, is right? Oh, she appeared. Yeah.
Can you listen?
Yeah. We can see you.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I think you cannot hear me.
We can understand.
So would you read the question for me? I'm
Actually,
sorry.
there is some question here, so I can read instead of Professor Choi. Is it okay? I have a question for Professor Park. The SWAN study explores the safety level of PFAS primarily in middle-aged or older women. Considering that vulnerability to environmental chemicals may vary across different age and gender groups, do you believe there are specific groups for which further studies on the safety levels of environmental chemicals such as PFAS are necessary? Your presentation has been informative and I appreciate your insights. That's it.
Yes. Excuse me. So actually, yesterday during the conference, and I mentioned the midlife and menopausal transition as one of understudied the life stage and the window of susceptibility to metabolic disease and environmental exposure. But more studied life stage and also well-known the windows of susceptibility is early life and the pregnancy, and environmental chemical exposure impact on this life stage is very critical, and so that's why it is very important to establish a life course approach to evaluate the whole windows from the conception to pregnancy and the puberty, the pregnancy, and then the middle life and the older life. So it is ideal to look at this the whole life from the same population, but it costs a lot, and it is very difficult to follow this population over that many decades. But in terms of the chemical safety, I think it is very important to evaluate in this different life stage. And then once we set up the guideline, and this standard level may not necessarily reflect the actual toxicity in that specific life stage group. So this is why we call this is a precision public health to protect the entire population. And then how to set up this, the standard guideline should be based on the most vulnerable population, not the average population. But in many cases, we more focus on the average population and how that impacted their health. But based on this this concept, and we need to more focus on this specific the life stage, and then the regulation should be based on that that group. So then everyone can benefit from that. So that's the general idea how we can what other life stage we need to consider.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe Professor Choi will appreciate your answer. So we need one question from audience here. So is there any question for speakers? Very difficult question is very good.
Yeah, I have questions for all of you actually. These days, there are growing concerns on metabolic dysregulation, especially we eat, all fatty food, and that affects, especially for women, pregnancy age and also during the pregnancy, especially the PCOS, the polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is greatly affected by insulin resistance. There is immaturity of follicle for ovulation, so that I think PFAS, your compound that PFAS, PFOS would have effects on it because of the estrogen level changes, increasing testosterone and decreasing testosterone with insulin resistance. Probably we need to pay attention to that age also, not let alone that midlife and old ages. So what do you think of that strategy that, or methodology that we can study on this aspect?
So certainly from the imaging point of view, there's a lot of work in metabolic factors that affect brain function, and particularly in diabetes, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, we see differences in the brain's response to glucose intake and fructose in fatty foods. And so that's an important consideration, definitely, at the brain imaging level.
Yeah, I was thinking about it more from a public health standpoint, and really, if we see the consequences we see at the metabolic level, a lot of times have to do with which kind of food do you have access to, which kind of pollutants you're exposed to, which kind of lifestyle you conduct. And I think here the concepts of intersectionality become even more relevant. So it's, on the one hand side, we have gendered factors, and in addition to that, we have social deprivation, we have racialization, we have disability, and all these factors that come together to create different access to the things that could protect us. So I really think about this from a preventative perspective, and how can we include a perspective that takes all of these factors into account in order to improve the access to the factors that are protective. So it's really a societal question, I think, as well. So of course, measuring it is really important, but I see that almost a bit down the line when people already have it. And ideally, I think we need to start much earlier, but what we're seeing right now is that with increasing inequalities, we have an increase in these factors, which are really consequences of these inequalities. So going back to sex and gender, I think when it comes to public health policies, is really something we might have to take into account with these other factors as well, in order to reduce the risk factors in the first place.
Yeah, just the Professor Park first. The video,
All right, I just want to follow up Sabin's comments on that. With so many possible factors, it is not easy to predict. So machine learning comes into play, right? So have to make use of machine learning algorithms to embrace the heterogeneity of the data and create and train or develop a computational model that can allow not only diagnosis but also prognosis and to aid the decision making. So.
Yeah. So to make that point, so the main issue is that the environmental exposure is from the convenience, and then if you give up the convenience, and then you can reduce your exposure level. And so that's why the exposure and then this convenience is a two sides of the coin. And it is very difficult to force the people change their behavior because we are already spoiled to use this convenience. And so that's why the only way is the governmental policy change to protect the entire population, not at the individual level. So that should be the direction that we need to move. Instead of each individual change their behavior to reduce the exposure and then protect prevent their disease. That's the main takeaway.
Thank you.
Right now, the time is out.
Okay, so I know you have more questions, but the time is already past 5, which means it's time to wrap up our all the program for BrainLink X-Day Lab Day, X-Lab Day, including talk concert. Once again, thanks so much for your participation, especially to the 4 excellent overseas scholars who joined us to share their insights, and the audience who attended here on site, and the attendees who connected via Zoom. I think this concludes our talk concert today. Please give us a big round of applause for all of us. Thank you. Thank you all for your participation.